All right, Zig coming in on the top. Today on the show, we have the return of Mike Baggetta, guitar wizard. Mike has worked with a plethora of great artists, some of which are David Torn, Jerome Harris, Darcy James Argue, Donnie McCaslin, Dominic Eade, and Nels Cline, as well as Mike Watt and Stephen Hodges in the band MSSV, which is what we're here to talk about today. MSSV has a new album out. It's called Human Reaction. It's available on all streaming platforms. And to accompany that, they're going on a tour that goes 58 shows in 58 days. One of which is October 7th at the Beachland Ballroom in Cleveland, Ohio. So if you're in Cleveland, that's the one you're going to check out. And I'm a little biased because my band, Sea Level, letter C dash level, we are a high-energy funk punk reggae rock group that takes acoustic 12-string guitars and runs them through Marshall amplifiers, is opening up for MSSV, which is a goal me and my bass player had since we started playing, as we wanted to open up for Mike Watt. So this is a really big deal for us, and we're super excited about it. And this new record, Human Reaction, is a banger of an album put out by Big Ego. We're going to listen to a track. This is Human Reaction off Human Reaction by MSSV. Reaction off the album Human Reaction. The band is MSSV. The album's available now on all streaming platforms. Check it out. Also, October 7th at the Beachland Ballroom in Cleveland, Ohio is the date you want to go to if you're in Ohio. If not, there's 57 other dates. I talked to Mike Baggetta a while ago with his last release, which was Every When We Go. And this is a cool continuation of our conversation from before then. In that conversation, we get a little more into his history. So if you want a little more backstory on Mike Baggetta, check that episode out. Also, next week, I'm talking to Stephen Hodges, the other third of MSSV, who has an incredible backstory and has worked with amazing artists like Tom Waits and Mavis Staples. Both my conversation with Mike Baggetta and Stephen Hodges got really, really deep and inspirational. This was a really cool conversation. I'm really excited for you guys to hear it. Also, in 2020, I got to talk to Mike Watt. We had about like a 4-hour conversation, and it was just as moving. So if you want to hear the whole band's perspective, there's episodes to dive into in the catalog. Last thing before we get to this conversation, if you can like, rate, review, subscribe to the podcast on any of the podcast platforms, it helps me keep talking to cool guests like Mike Baggetta, Mike Watt, and Stephen Hodges, and sharing their insight with you. And last plug, October 19th, Sea Level is opening for Pacifier at the Grog Shop. So if you're into my banter and you're like, this music's cool, I think I'll go check them out again, or in a different setting, that's happening. Now, here's my conversation with Mike Baggetta. To kind of jump into it, I wanted to ask you about kind of on the topic of music teachers, Ted Dunbar.
Oh wow, yeah. Yeah, Ted was amazing. I got to study with him actually pretty close to the end of his life, and I learned so much from him about music and about everything else too. He's a really big influence on me.
Because I heard or read in another interview that you said, I'm going to mess this up, something along the lines that he helped you play with more emotional intent or learn jazz with like emotion. And I was like, what do you mean by that? When I was reading that interview. So can you elaborate on that, or did I completely biff that quote?
Yeah, no, yeah, I don't really remember what I say a lot of the times, but that sounds like something I would say. Yeah, well, for anybody who's listening who doesn't know who Ted Dunbar is, he's passed away. Geez, man, 20 years or something now, but yeah, he was just an incredible guitar player. And teacher for sure. But he was from Port Arthur, Texas, and ended up kind of relocating to Indianapolis. And he got to know Wes Montgomery really well. And Ted also played with his thumb like Wes Montgomery. And Ted was also a pharmacist. And I think I remember like this story that when he moved to Indianapolis, he got a job at the pharmacy across the street from this club called the Missile Room, because that's where Wes played every night when he was in town. So Ted would go work his pharmacy job, lock up the door, walk right across the street, and go hang in the missile room and listen to Wes Montgomery all night. And he got to know him, and I think Wes had him sub for him when he was on the road and stuff like that. And then, of course, Ted moved to New York City and played in all sorts of amazing groups. He's one of my favorite records he's on is this record, a Sam Rivers record called Sizzle. That's an incredible record. He was in the Frank Foster Loud Minority Big Band. He's on an amazing Tony Williams Lifetime record called Ego. And there's a great video of that band in Montreux with Ted and Junie Booth is on bass, and that's great. So just like a wealth of like amazing music from the 70s and 80s, and then into his own projects in the 90s. But he was, I kind of consider him as like a really consummate improviser, like not only like really studying the harmony of music and the guitar as just kind of like being able to, be technically like really proficient to do what you want to do on the guitar. But I learned a lot from him in the sense of like how to sort of think about, what your sound is, or like the importance of trying to have an identifiable sound that kind of speaks to your personality, and how that kind of translates to the way that you play music too. How do you impart your personality into the music that you play? And that was kind of something that seemed really important that he covered a lot. And I felt like that was one of the things that connected me to him a lot, because I didn't have a lot of teachers to that point that talked about that kind of stuff, which I always thought was really important. But lessons were always kind of like, here's this scale, here's this arpeggio. And that's, that's great. And that's really important. And Ted had all that stuff as well. But he would talk to me a lot more about like how to try to draw my personality out of the way that I played, and try to kind of identify what that was just in my life too, and how that can kind of influence how you play and how you sound like in the way of you that you live your life and the things that you identify with. So yeah, I mean, really like very like fundamental stuff, I think, are those things. And those are always the things that attracted me most to music anyways, and those are the things that made me want to play music. So yeah, he was a really important teacher for me, and he really believed in teaching too. It wasn't just like he was kind of doing this gig. Like he really wanted to like connect with players and talk and work on music with them kind of as equals in some manner. That was kind of always my impression from what I got from him from those couple of years.
That's it. Well, I think that speaks very highly of anyone who's diving into teaching in that aspect. It's really trying to bring people to become their own. And like there's a lot of like it kind of hits upon like a Kenny Warner. Have you ever dove into any of his stuff?
I read that book, yeah.
Okay, yeah, you know that book? Okay. But that whole like idea of like music school kind of taking a turn down the way that kind of takes you from what brought you there. It's a lot of like kind of cookie cutter, like you got to cover a lot of this stuff, and like which is all important stuff. Learning the
maybe not. I have my views on that, but anyways.
Well, no, like I agree with that, because it does take you away. I mean, some of those skill set, like ear training and like learning how to find those skills, I think is important. Sure. I don't think it's the be all end all.
Yeah.
But the kind of like how would he kind of like aid you in finding how to put your personality in your playing? It sounds like a really Dodoy question, but like that's pretty profound.
No, I think it's really intangible. Yeah, I think it's a great question, because I think that's the thing that everybody wants to know. Like, okay, well, I have all these tools, so what?
Yeah.
And I think a lot of it was actually it was always recording myself, which is something he talked about. Like if you're practicing, and by practicing, I guess in this sense, I mean just sort of like playing a song. And in that context, that was very like jazz with a capital J. So like we'd be playing standards, like All the Things You Are or Stella by Starlight or something. So if you're going to practice that tune, to play the tune, put the tape recorder, which actually still is, I think, is a better tool than the phone. I think using a cheap tape recorder is a better tool than using the voice memo on the phone, because the tape is going to wear out and it's going to break. And so you have a limited amount of time to use it.
Yeah, yeah.
Whereas if you record it on the phone, you go like, oh, it's there forever, and then you never get to it. But if it's on the tape, you're like, man, this thing's going to break in like, 7 weeks. I need to check this out, or it's going to disintegrate or something. That's my theory about that. But anyways, so yeah, so I would record. He'd have you record yourself, and he'd have you record all your lessons and listen back to them and stuff. And I think part of it is you listen back and you say like, oh, that sounds like not like what I wish I played there. What do I wish I played? You transcribe yourself, and then you kind of alter it from based on what you're hearing in your ear, in your mind, in your head, your imagination, and then maybe you write that out, and then maybe you practice that. Like, so you kind of like, you transcribe yourself, change some of the things that you wish were different, and then you learn that, and then you practice that, and then you kind of go through this process a lot. This is sort of like some of the things he would talk about, but that's sort of my own variation on it too. He was definitely big into the recording yourself and listening back to it, and sort of being critical of how you could have done things more like how you wanted. And just if you're thinking about that in the process, you're intrinsically kind of like identifying your voice in the music, because you're making judgments about, oh, I wish I'd played this, or this was a cool idea, but how come I didn't keep investigating it for longer? Or this was a cool idea I played and then I never played it again. How come? I wish I'd worked with that idea more. And then what do I mean by that? Well, maybe that was a cool rhythm, and maybe I could have extended the rhythm, or played the rhythm faster, or turned the rhythm around, or just not abandoned it after 2 measures or something. Like some of those ideas are things that would stick in my mind when I would listen to myself, and then it became kind of, for me, like the idea of like, yeah, I have these pretty okay ideas when I'm playing, but then I don't stick with them. So my primary thing became like, how can I really take like just one idea, start a solo with like one little 2-beat rhythm, and then can I make a whole statement for a couple of minutes where I'm investigating that, where it's kind of interesting and not academic or not kind of boring, but it's exciting enough that I can do that. That was always kind of my interest in listening back to myself.
Okay. But that's such a critical tool, and that it's, wow. Yeah. Okay. And a guy coming hanging out with Wes, I imagine he's tracking a lot of stuff in his mind, and after he heard that,
I can't even imagine getting to see him up close every night and getting to know him, wow, yeah. Amazing.
Yeah, but I think that is really, because like a lot of musicians can't stand hearing themselves in like anything, you know what I mean?
Sure.
And like,
yeah, I totally understand that, but like if you'd never listened to what you did, I don't.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, what better way to improve it than to listen back and say, yeah, that's sucked, but why?
Yeah.
Because your memory, your ear memory plays tricks on you, I think, if you don't actually go back and listen to it. Like you can play a gig, or you can practice or whatever, and you can go like, man, that sounded great, and maybe it did, but then maybe if you listen back to a recording, you could be like, oh, actually that wasn't as good as I thought. And then how come, right? Or you could have the opposite thought, like, man, I always play terribly, I always sound awful. But then, okay, well, why do you think that? It's hard to remember truthfully. So if you go back to the recording, you can critically listen and say, oh, this is what I mean. Maybe it's not that bad, but I wish I'd done more of this or less of this,
Yeah. Yeah. And it's such like I think it's like once you get past that bar of like your threshold, once you move through that point in your musical story, it's like easier to like grow from that. But there's such like at least maybe I had such a like a, I'll use my I statements. I had such a hump getting into that first like threshold of listening to myself, especially with singing. But
yeah, that I can really relate to, since I've like started singing more. But I have to think about it as the same process. Like like, oh, what do I wish was different about how I'm singing? Well, if I listen back to it, I can identify it, and then I can kind of practice it. And that's just sort of the way my brain works too. I mean, I don't think it has to be that way for everybody, but like, if you imagine a writer, somebody who's writing a poem or a novel or lyrics or whatever, like I would imagine they have to be reading it a lot to edit it, like, oh, there's one syllable too many, where is it? Or like, oh, I used this word too many times, or what's a better way that I can get this idea across? Like, if you're not going over those words, how do you know how to improve the sort of final product, I guess, which in this case, I'm just talking about the final product being like your musical personality, not really like a symphony or something.
Yeah, but that's kind of a symphony of life. That's an ever-changing thing.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, the symphony of life. We're constantly composing the symphony of life is my new quote for you.
That's deep shit. I like that.
Yeah, you can use that one.
Before, I wanted to definitely talk about some vocal stuff with you, but before that, on the kind of like topic of guitar lessons, I bought, after our last conversation, I bought the Arcana Book 1.
Wow, great. That's a great book.
It's such a great book. Like, I got it like earlier this week, knowing that I'm like, I told Mike I was going to get that book before we talked next. And like, I thought I had
you're on a deadline now.
I thought I had until the concert, because that's in October.
Right.
But then Howard hit me up, so I was like, I order it now. I didn't realize how big a book it was going to be. But what a cool series of books, man. In that fingering article with like playing these scales in all these like kind of like abstracted ways it's such like a little part of that book, but like is really profound.
Well, that's kind of why I like that book too. Like so this book Arcana, it's sort of like a collection of like little lessons by different musicians, or not even lessons, but just like little chapters about whatever that person wants to write about music or not music, I guess, even too. But it's cool because it's like every chapter is a different writer or a different musician writing something, and so it's kind of like a bunch of little pamphlets put together in a bigger book, so it's not like you have to read the whole thing. You can just kind of read a chapter by Mark Rebo, or you can read a chapter by Ikue Mori or whoever, see what they're thinking about when they wrote it, and then it gives you something to think about music for however long you want to toss that around in your mind. I think it's really, really fun. It's like a bunch of little slices of other people's ideas,
Yeah. It's like a zine of avant-garde articles. Like,
yeah, it totally is. Yeah, totally is. And like really useful information too. Even if you don't agree with it, it's like kind of, you have something interesting to think about for a while,
Just like what Mark Rebo writes about, like earplugs.
Right.
Yeah, that's right.
Them. Yeah, volume or something. Yeah, I don't use earplugs either, and sometimes I think I should. Sometimes I use earplugs when I'm hearing other people's music, just like a volume thing. But I've never used them on stage, because kind of for that reason of like, well, I don't want to miss the feeling of it. And sometimes it does. I mean, like MSSV, we can play loud, but we can also play really, really quiet. And so I'm afraid kind of like if I've got the plugs in for when it might get kind of loud, which is not really like sustained loud all the time, but we have, we're a dynamic band, that when it gets real quiet, what's that going to do for how I'm hearing it or something? So I've never really used them either, but yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, like I use them when I'll go to concerts or just loud places, like,
yeah, same,
you know what I mean?
Same.
Like, but playing, it's like, especially with singing, it keeps you all in your head. Like,
that's true. Yeah. Yeah, it's too much.
And on that, like last time we talked about like how Watt and Hodges were very supportive of you singing, and like kind of like being like, why don't you? You totally should. And this new record, Human Reaction, is very much you on vocals. So like,
yeah.
Kind of like, let's pick up where we left off with that a little bit. Like when it came to like writing these songs and like really put was this kind of like based on improv you guys had as a group and then adding lyrics later, or was there a process to that where you wrote songs and brought it to the group? What did that look like?
Yeah, it was just pretty much me. It was me writing the songs and writing the words and bringing them to the guys. Like what I'll usually do and what we're doing now. We have a new set of music that we're going to record after this upcoming tour, as
Yeah.
usual. That'll be the third MSSV record.
Yes.
Yeah. Did you say F?
No, I said yes.
Oh, yes.
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 More. Is this
F? Yeah.
F? All in the key of F.
There actually is a lot of F, which is maybe it's not a problem. But anyways, yeah. So what we'll do is usually I'll write the parts. I'll even kind of I make demos of like fake MIDI drums that I play on the keyboard, and then I fake bass parts that I kind of play on the guitar with an octave pedal or sometimes MIDI keyboard, and then I'll play my guitar parts. And then if I have the words done, I'll do a scratch vocal track. Sometimes I'm just sort of saying nonsense syllables in the rhythm of what I think the lyrics might end up being, as I don't have good ideas for words right away. And so I put that together and I send them essentially a demo of the tune, maybe with a click. And I'll also send them their individual tracks, like the bass track or the drum part, so that they can just sort of hear where I'm coming from in those. But the difference is I'm writing those parts for them. I'm writing the bass part as like, yeah, this would be really cool to hear Watt play this idea with his sounds, or this would be really cool for Hodges to play with his sounds. Things that I think are not like, I'm not asking them to play stuff that wouldn't feel like their personality, I guess is what I mean. Because again, that idea, like we just talked about with Ted, like that's a really important thing to me, like for musicians, I think in general. So I don't want to write something to give to someone to play that's just like some like random, like dumb Baggetta idea. Like I'm going to write their part with their sound and their playing and their personality in mind. And I think that's, they seem cool with that. And it's cool for me because I get to kind of hear these like masters play with their sound and their personality, these ideas that I came up with that were inspired by their sound and their personality. It's like a very like, what's that snake that eats its own tail thing? The Ouroboros. It's like a very aerobaric kind of a thing. But yeah, that's kind of the way this band works. And then of course I always tell them, like, this is just a starting point. If you have ideas that it morphs into as we play it, or if you have a better way of doing this, by all means do it, because I'm not going to say like, oh no, it has to be this way, this is the part, so that's it. No, absolutely, it's just a starting place. So things change and things morph, and they come up with better ways to play the stuff I give them, and then it makes me kind of maybe change my parts as we go. And especially as we do these tours, like several weeks on the road playing new music, things are going to evolve and they're going to change. That's why we like recording the albums at the end of the tour, because you've been able to play the music for 40, 50 nights in a row. Like, man, what better time to record it, right?
Right. That's the most like rehearsed and like idea spread it's going to kind of be.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And I think some of that, the best practice you can do is in front of people, in front of an audience, because that's different than just doing practice in the,
it's a living tape machine. They'll tell you.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Right. Feedback from the people is sometimes a cool thing.
Sometimes, yeah. Yeah, because I remember when you guys played at the Beachland Tavern last, the tune where you and Watt go back and forth.
With the vocals.
Pillow Talk, I believe?
Yeah, Pillow Talk. Yeah, that's on the new record, yeah.
Yeah. And like, so like, going into, did the songs kind of evolve before the tour, like with lyrics and stuff like that? Like,
yeah, I had them written, like I had everything done maybe 3 months before the tour started.
Okay, and then the tour is just where it grinds out, expands. It goes through first draft, second draft, final draft, and then you track it when you're done with the tour.
I guess so. Yeah, I mean it's pretty much it's probably second draft when we hit the road, and then as things kind of change, it's because we do practice before we do the tour. We don't just start with nothing. Like I'm going to go out. I'm going to go out to LA in a couple weeks, and I think we do about 2 weeks of practice. We do practice every day, and then we start the tour. Yeah. Well, yeah, because I mean, you don't want to be like.
Yeah.
I like some adventure when I play. I mean, I like a lot of adventure when I play, but I don't like the kind of adventure where it's like, oh wait, how's this song go again?
Yeah.
Like that stuff has to get like solidified with no issue. The adventure is kind of like an exploring the songs because you already know the map so well. Then it's kind of like, how far can we take this idea? That's the adventure I like in the performance. But yeah, I mean, I think everybody's got to practice to get the basics together for sure.
Yeah, for sure. If not, but that totally makes sense because the feeling that you're barely landing the bit compared to like expanding the bit, it's maybe similar out of perspective, but like in perspective is completely a different feeling.
Yeah, and plus, I mean, I take it pretty seriously that people have paid money to come and be a part of that show for the night. We're not talking like Taylor Swift prices or anything, but I mean, $20 is $20. I wouldn't want to waste that. I mean, I've been there. I've paid $20 and gone to hear bands and was like, oh man, maybe you guys should have done a little more practice or something. But then I've heard $20 and I was like, man, I would have paid $100 for that. And that's what I want to bring people. I want people to feel like, they're getting more than they bargained for when they come to hear us.
Well, and also it's, I think when you guys played, you played on a Sunday at the Beachland, and Watt said something along the line that's like, there's only 52 Sundays, and like, you know what I mean? But there is only so many days.
It's true.
And that Sunday or any other Sunday on tour, that person can be anywhere else they want to be, and they're there with you. Mm-hmm. So I totally understand that. Let's make this the best absolute moment it can be, even if it's, not a T Swift level show. It is, you're here. Tom's here.
Well, yeah, I mean, we're not, I don't know if it's obvious, but we're not really going for that kind of a show.
Yeah. Clearly,
we've only got like one outfit anyways, we can't do the changes. But yeah, no, I mean, it is real serious. And like, I try to think about that. I mean, that's like, yeah, he says that's part of the deal. Like there's only 52 Mondays in a year or whatever. And that's really true. And maybe it sounds kind of funny to some people, but man, I have heard that a lot, obviously like every night or whatever. But I think about that, and I think about it in terms of everything. Like this is the only August 6th Sunday morning conversation I'm ever going to get to have with you.
Right.
So I want to make sure that I'm present and I'm paying attention and I'm locked in and I'm really like, having an actual conversation that means something. It's not just I don't want to think that there's any throwaway moments in life, and I, it's easy for people to kind of start going through the motions for some things. Like I get that, like things are difficult or people got stuff on their mind, but if there's a way that you can kind of recenter yourself into like really focusing on what's going on, I think that's really cool. I started thinking about that. I had thyroid cancer a long time ago.
Yeah. And
I remember and I'm totally fine now. This is like, man, this has got to be almost 20 years ago now too. Yeah. But, I was in my 20s and I remember like going to the doctor and, she was like so nice. And like, she comes out and she's like, I have really bad news. And I'm like, what? Because I had, had this stuff checked out and she's like, well, it's never an easy way to tell anyone this, but you have cancer. And you're like, whoa,
holy shit,
that's like a really, a really heavy thing, and again, luckily it was like very easy for me. It was like a very easy one to treat. It was like, I'm not even like comparing myself to people who have like actual cancer because it was very easy and everything's cool. But I do remember in that moment and kind of going through it and taking care of it. And like afterwards being like, man, I mean, people say it all the time. Life is short and things are very fleeting. But when something like that happens to you, you really realize it.
Yeah.
And you really start to think about like, what are the chances that I haven't been taking, or what are the ways that I haven't been kind of giving people 100%, and how can I kind of redirect my perception of my life to do that, so that's something that I've been trying to do, that became really present for me in that moment. I don't always succeed. I'm not perfect, but I try, and I always keep it in mind. And so I think about that on the gig. I think about that when we talk, and I think about that, regardless of what's happening.
Wow. That's intense. At 20, you said?
It was probably, well, let's see, I could figure it out. It was 2006. So what is that? 17 years ago, and I'm 44. Am I 44? Yeah. So 17 minus 40, or 44 minus 17.
Okay. But still, like, what it
You're not gonna give me the number?
Oh, sorry. That's. I never said I was a math teacher.
I think it's 27, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
27. Holy shit. And as a musician, you're like, oh my God, this is.
Yeah, I mean, that's like, that's like a great age, I mean, they're all great ages, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. I think it's cool to get a little perspective sometimes.
Well, for like to be able to walk away with that kind of like mindset and moving forward, like I think definitely, they say like when you're going through something like that, having like a positive mindset and kind of like moving forward helps a lot. And I've never been through a thing like that, so I don't know. But like, you know what I mean? Like to be able to take that away and put that in, because like one thing I've noticed with a lot of projects you do, because like every time I've gotten to like look into your career, it's like an onion. There's just more and more layers of like, oh my God, Mike played with this guy, and like this is a whole other thing, and like but everything you've done like seems to be something you authentically really want to do, and like it's not like like I've never got like you had to do the bar gig circuit, you know what I mean, like, which is really cool and inspiring. Like, does that make sense?
Well,
you know what I mean? Does that make sense?
Yeah,
like,
yeah. I mean, I have though.
Yeah.
I've definitely done things I didn't want to do because I needed the money or whatever.
Well, yeah. But like,
but I mean, maybe what I think, maybe I hope I can kind of interpret from what you're saying though, is that even if some of those things are what I did, if you hear them, it doesn't sound like I'm phoning it in, because I'm not, even if I'm doing a gig that is like not, the kind of thing that I would love to be doing with my time 100% at one point. I know that I was definitely trying to do my best on that gig. That's something that I can always be sure about. I was never on a gig that I didn't want to be on where I wasn't still trying to play 100%. And so that's saying I was on gigs I didn't want to be on, but I was never like, oh, I hate this place and I hate this gig, so who cares what I do?
Yeah.
No, it might have been like, I hate this place and I hate this guy, but I'm still going to play as good as I can play for the music.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're right though. There wasn't like a lot of those. I mean, most of the people I've ever played with, I had a blast with, and a lot of the projects that got recorded, I've had a blast with. And even if I didn't think I was going to, trying to kind of, like you said, trying to keep that mindset and trying to like deliver, because it's the only time you're going to get to do that in that space with those people in that moment. That's really important. So yeah, why not? And to your point, like I didn't always have like a positive mindset going through the illness thing, but like at all. Yeah. And like I said, I still don't. I'm not perfect. Like there are times where like something dumb happens and I'm like, oh, you lose sight of just the fact that life is kind of this cool little series of puzzles and stuff. But I do try to remember, and I do try to deliver that for whatever I'm doing.
Well, it's adding tension to our composition of life. There's got to be tension to get released. Right. That's such a good metaphor.
There you go.
But yeah, no, like of course, like if you were perfect, this would be a way more boring conversation. You know what I'm saying? Like,
right. Yeah.
But that's like I guess because I dove back into some of your earlier works, and I think it was like your first record I found was like a prepared guitar record, which I don't know. I
Yes.
didn't bring that up last time, but that's what I mean. Like that's not honing it in. This is Mike doing what he wants to do. This is sick. You know what I mean? Like that's where I got that like that perception of that you're doing it your way 100% for at least for most of the gigs and music I've found of yours so far.
Well, yeah, I mean, I do always have the opinion of like, if it's something that I think has kind of been done better before by other people, there's no reason for me to do it, you know?
Yeah.
And so that kind of extends to like why I do a lot of original music, because like there's so many great versions of great players doing, you know, if we're still talking about jazz with a capital J, you know, I mean, there's no lack of amazing players, you know, playing that repertoire. Like I have nothing. I don't feel like I have anything that to add to that is more important than what I'm trying to do with my own music. You know, I'm not saying that I couldn't add something, but I'm saying that if I, you know, in the finite amount of time that I have, I want to spend it doing something else, because there's already great versions of these things that I love out there.
The post genre of jazz.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I don't want to. I don't want to say. I don't want to say that like I don't do jazz, or I do jazz, or I refer to it as jazz with a capital J, because I think there's also lowercase jazz, which is you know, the whole term is very loaded for a lot of people, and
Yeah.
so I don't really even want to get into that conversation, because I don't feel like I have a part in it, you know, for a lot of
Yeah.
reasons. But I mean, you know, we were talking about Ted and that music, and so it's kind of natural, I think, to sort of stay on that. Uh, but I mean, I love that music as much as I love rock with a capital R, or small r, or classical music, or 12-tone music, or Afro pop, or whatever. You know, I mean, I just love good music, and so that's why I kind of got into trying not to call it anything, because you know, I'm not anything specific. You know.
Yeah. Well, and I think I mean, like in a world where everyone like venues and algorithms have to like find a way to place your music in a thing so it is fed into the thing that feeds to other people, it really
Yeah, it's
limits
brutal.
that. It is. And like, it really makes it hard. And like, I gotta imagine like booking makes it very hard to be like, this is what we do. But I think with what you guys do with MSSV, like you put your guys' names and everyone's like, oh yeah, sweet. Because it is this kind of post genre. Like each one of you guys in MSSV, you Watt and Hodges, like have a plethora of different genres and backgrounds and musicality that like that just put together makes that kind of the genre doesn't matter.
Yeah, I mean, that's why the music works so well with those guys. I mean, it's written for those guys, it's interpreted by those guys with me, and you know, I remember like the first tour we did, that kind of shorty tour when Wall of Flowers came out, that 10-day coast to coast tour. That was, I remember like people didn't really know like what was going to happen, like what in the world are they going to play? What is this music going to sound? I mean, I myself included sometimes, which is awesome. Um, and then I think the next time we did a tour, I think people were kind of thought they were going to hear something, and maybe it was different from what they thought. And I think this tour too, people might go into it thinking it might be some of the stuff like last time, but it's going to be something different again, you know. Um, but I think there's a thread running through everything, which is the three of us interpreting these songs that are built for these three people in that moment. So I think that's the important thing. You know, we've talked so much about like individual personalities in music and how important I think that is, and something that really Ted spoke to me a lot about. Um, that's how I like to think, you know, like I'm just some dude that does the things that I like. But isn't that isn't that who everybody is? Isn't everybody like just some dude that's trying to just do whatever they want, you know? And for some people that might be like one thing, you know, and then it's a little easier to kind of, and some people they even like to go into the folder like, yeah, I played I only play this, boom. Then, okay, well, great. So you're all set. But for a lot of people are many different things, and not even just music. Like, you're one can be whatever. One can be like a mother and a daughter and a musician and a businesswoman and a accountant and a religious person and a cook and a clean, like you can't, like you're all these things throughout the day, and it's different for everybody. So why do I only have to say that I play this when I really do all kinds of different things, because I'm trying to reflect my personality in life. That's important because no one else can do that. You know what I mean? Like no one else can play the things that I play in the way that I play them, how I play them in that moment, which is kind of like, people can go like, well, duh, yeah. I mean, it's maybe even think it's kind of a cop out, but I really believe in that. And I think that that's really important for everybody. And that's also why I'm not quick to write people off too much in music, because, anybody who's trying to do anything in music and putting themselves out there, I mean, that's pretty heavy, like already. So that they have to believe in it to some extent. Maybe it's not your thing. Okay, that's cool, but it doesn't detract from the fact that they're out there actually putting themselves on the line and doing something that you're not doing, just by the principle of that you're not them. So I think that it's really important to for everybody to sort of check that out when they're thinking about music and musicians and or whatever you're checking out.
Right. Well, yeah, and I think that's well said, and I think it is important to, because whatever instrument you pick up or whatever the creative outlet, if it's writing or if it's saxophone, there's kind of like a blueprint for this is a good writer, this is a good saxophone player, and like, how do you find yourself in that? You know what I mean? You can very much get bogged down in like, oh, if I don't write this book about children becoming wizards, or if I don't play like this, you know what I mean? Like, I'm going to not be what's considered a good writer or saxophonist. But knowing that most art is an expression of you in that moment and growing from that, and it's a multifaceted thing. It's not just books about children wizards or whatever, you know what I mean? Like, I think it's really important to hear, and it's really important to hear from like musicians and artists and creatives you are inspired by. So like, hearing that from you is definitely super inspiring for me. So,
well, that's kind of like before, like the music education thing, like, yeah, you have to learn this, and this before you can learn X, Y, and Z, and then you can do it, 1, 2, 3 or whatever. Like, I get that.
yeah.
But I also don't think that it's always necessary for everybody, because some people don't want to do that. Like some people's output is not going to be based on those things. And some people don't know that yet, because sometimes when you go into a music program, sometimes you're real young and you don't know about yourself enough yet to know what you want to do, or to know how to explore who you are in music or in art or whatever. So, I mean, I get that. Like, okay, yeah. So even if you don't know, here's all the tools you need and all the building blocks. And that was a lot of what I received, and I'm thankful for it. But I also know people that, like, probably learned all that stuff and maybe felt like they didn't have to use it to get into, like, free noise improv or whatever. I just I feel like, and I do think that there's a lot of teachers that get that, and there's a lot of teachers that kind of like try to teach to the individual. And I think when I teach, that's kind of what I try to do. If I have a student that wants to learn something about what I do, or they want to kind of, a lot of times when I have people approach me about taking lessons or whatever, it's really cool because they have kind of heard some of this stuff about me, and so they'll go like, yeah, I want to take lessons in like learning how to find my individual voice. And I'm like, great, I'm way into that. Let's do it. That's my whole thing, because that's what is really important. And to get to that point, it's not always about like, you have to learn these 12 keys and you have to learn all these fingerings and you have to learn this with the metronome. Sometimes it is about that. Sometimes it's good just to know. But sometimes people don't need that either for what they want to do. And that's cool too. So, standardized music education, I think is like it's the sword and the shield kind of a thing,
Yeah.
at the same time. So,
No, I think
but like I said, I'm just some dude. I don't really know.
well, I think that's really well said, and I think you're right. I think you're right. Like even when you like learn all these steps of a thing, right? I think that matters more after the fact. You're like, I just want to learn why this song worked so I can make my own song. And like if you learn all the ingredients before the song, sometimes you forget the song.
Well, that stuff was always after the fact. Like
Yeah.
Bach, J.S. Bach, he didn't
Mhm.
have counterpoint rules to follow at first. Like he just improvised, two voice pieces. And then, maybe I don't know, I'm probably going to get the history wrong, but like as far as I understand it, he would improvise these two voice pieces and then kind of write them down as he went. And that was the piece. And then after the fact, people studied them and came up with the rules for counterpoint or something, at some high level. I know there's like chant and stuff before that, but I don't. The point though is that I don't think J.S. Bach was like concerned with the Ten Commandments of how to write perfect counterpoint when he was writing two-part inventions. I think that stuff definitely comes after the fact when you go back and you analyze it because you love the piece and you want to know what's happening and maybe there's something in there that you can take for yourself. I mean, that reflects the thing I was saying before about taping yourself and going back and learning from it and changing and whatever. Like that's cool. But then the problem comes when people sort of solidify it as rules that you have to follow.
Yeah.
That dogmatism is a difficult thing for me in a creative enterprise.
I think some of the dogmatism or some of like the methodology, like the idea that there's steps to follow is some type of comfort that if I keep doing this thing, I will get to the thing I think I want to be. You know what I mean? Like sometimes I think,
Sure.
sometimes I think that's maybe what makes that so strong because it is really hard to like believe in yourself to some degree when you're like, I'm not a John Coltrane or a whatever guy who wrote Lord of the Rings. I forget what I was going for. Like, other creative dude. You know what I mean? Like, so I think there's a comfort in that. Like, but I also there's like that critical thought that like personality discovery, that who am I, those big questions, I don't think comes out of comfort. I think there's got to be some tension in
Yeah.
this composition of your life, like the
Right.
threshold you need to cross to find that.
For
And
sure. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
that's I think a really cool roundabout way to get back to recording, like in analyzing yourself like that. Um, and like I guess like, did you find it easy to kind of like find good things about yourself when you first started listening back to like maybe going back to these lessons with Ted? Like, or was that more of a challenge to be able to like listen to what am I? That's the nugget there. Like, which is, I guess it's a kind of side tangent because we kind of talked about what to look for and what you were kind of, not to look for, but what you looked for and like how you would build off these motifs of like maybe a little two rhythmic ideas and try to make like a whole sentence out of two words musically. But like, was this a process that you found very easy at first or maybe not as much?
Um, Maybe well, it's kind of a long time ago now, but I mean, I can't imagine it was obvious at first. Yeah, I'm sure like listening at first, I was kind of like, well, what am I listening for? And then you can think about other music you like. What are the things you like in other music? Oh, I like stuff that feels energetic, or I like, um, you know, things that make me want to dance, or I like when things are really loud and then really quiet. Like you can really pare it down to like the basics, and get a lot out of it. So I think some of it is kind of identifying what you like, and that speaks to who you are, because that's why you like something. You just like it. And then so kind of maybe trying to hear some of that in my own playing would have been helpful. But I think after like a couple of times, I caught on to like, oh, this is actually something that I'm doing that could be cool if I did more of it, or this could be cool if I did way less of it, um, or generally, a general consensus with me is like, oh, this would have been cool if I like played like way less than I'm playing,
Mm.
and that's something I've been thinking about for decades.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think about that all the time, especially with talking. I'm like, just stop saying anything, man. Just like
Right.
listen.
Right. Yep.
But so did you find like
But
now?
that can be, sometimes you can go in the other direction too much, and like you just don't play,
Yeah.
and then people are like, okay, well, you're on stage, so
What are you
we
doing?
want to hear you do something.
That's true too. Um, so like another thing, like when we last spoke, you told me this like horror story of this music teacher who you wrote a song and you played it for, and who was just like, yeah, maybe don't sing, which is the shittiest thing
Oh,
for
oh yeah,
anyone to like say to
yeah. That
any.
was actually I was on stage, and it was this little like summer camp um, kind of music thing, and yeah, I was taking like just guitar lessons, and but I didn't think it was like different. Like, well, why can't I sing while I play guitar like everyone else in the world? Like, why would that? I never even thought like, why would that be weird or whatever. And I remember I did it, and it was really hard for me to like sing while I was playing guitar. It's actually still really hard for me to sing while I'm actually trying to play something on the guitar at the same time, which I think is hard for everybody from the more people I talk to about it. And so, maybe it didn't like go that great, but it was also my first attempt at doing it on stage. And I remember like, afterwards, so what'd you think? Like, yeah, oh yeah, yeah, maybe no more singing or something. Yeah, I forget the words, but it was definitely like a crushing moment for me. Yeah.
Yeah, which is just anyone who's doing. Maybe I'm too supportive of kids, but like I think that's the worst thing. Like any teacher could say to anyone who's
I
showing
mean,
some.
it might have even been like an off the cuff little joke kind of thing in his mind or whatever.
Right.
But definitely for me, it was like, okay, so then yeah, I don't sing for like the next like 20 years of my life or whatever.
But still, like, so, like, I guess, like, now kind of diving into, like, I don't know if you were working on this before MSSV, but from our last conversation, it didn't really sound like it. Um, Now, like, I guess kind of listening to your voice start to grow and, like, hear these, is it kind of like revisiting those TED lessons? And, like, have you found, like, a starting point that you feel comfortable with? Like, does
Well,
that
the
make
starting
sense?
point is that I just have to do it.
Right.
I just do it. That's just the starting point. And if it's, it is what it is, and that's where you start. That's I don't have a problem with that. I'm not critical of the starting point because you just have to put the foot out the door.
It's true.
And that's hard enough sometimes. So okay, so you've done that, great, and then yeah, but now I can listen to it, or really, I was like kind of listening to demos, or really last year I was kind of like revisiting it after the gig in my mind every night, like, oh man, yeah, I can probably be a little more confident with these words, or maybe I don't actually have to like worry about pitches at this point because it's
Mm.
I can just sort of talk it out. And yeah, I feel like I'm kind of finding a vocal style for this music. Yeah, for sure.
That's cool, man. That's so cool. Like, I don't, it's really cool to have a conversation kind of about that, then hear it in the next like batch of stuff. Like, that's,
Yeah, yeah, you get real time development with me.
well, and we do that with any artist we like, you know what I mean? Like, even if I didn't get
100%.
to
Yeah.
pick your brain, which to me, this is an honor to be able to pick your brain and and see that growth. Cause that's like, it's, it seems like a thing. It seems like that's duh. Of course, every artist is going to grow with each record, but when you get to like kind of like be trying to figure that out on your own, not that you ever applied. I don't mean to put that weird personality voice joke on you, like, but you know what I mean. Like
No.
when you get to like when you're trying to figure it out yourself, like when I'm trying to figure it out for myself, and I'm grinding my head against the wall, and like to see these people I admire doing that too, but and doing it. You know what I mean? Like it just brings like a whole nother like cool weight of insight.
Well, it's kind of cool too for me because like it's almost like starting a different instrument, and I think maybe that kind of speaks to something you're thinking of too. Like, if you're talking to somebody about stuff like this, chances are they've been doing it for a while and their career is set up like, they are this and this is what they do and this is what we can talk about.
Yeah.
but then to throw in the mix, like, oh yeah, actually I also do this now, and I'm just doing it on my own because I want to do it. Like, that's maybe a nice different element. It's like, oh yeah, I also learned to play harp, and I'm going to play harp on all these gigs next week, you know. Like, it's kind of like oh, you're just starting this now. That's kind of interesting to be doing that, like, sort of later in my life, you know, like this thing that basically everyone has done since they were kids except me. But I've always wanted to do it. And so then finally I was like, well, you know, life's too short, and these guys seem like they're okay with putting up with it for a while. So I'll just go ahead and do it, you know? So I think it is interesting, in that respect. So yeah, I like talking about it.
It's awesome. And then Human Reaction, such a good song, man.
Like, oh, thank you.
That one,
Thanks.
that really well written, super awesome. Like, Watt kind of chords going on, but the melody and like everything, it kills, man. So like to come from that conversation was, I think I'm gonna start singing. Then to hear that, I'm like, oh my god, this is awesome.
Yeah, it's been really cool to kind of, you know, I mean, I feel like one thing that's great about working with Watt and Hodges is, like, you know, they're both kind of really into the constant development of the person, you know, or the musician or the music and the music. You know, I'm not in a situation with people that want things to be the same every time. You know, I'm lucky enough to be in a situation with people that want things to grow every time and change and improve and evolve. And, you know, that you don't always get that with everybody. And it really, you know, it lines up with kind of the way that I see stuff. And I think that's why we get along so well in this endeavor, you know, in this band, and in this music. So yeah, it is cool that you can hear that as well, because I definitely feel it from getting to work with these guys so much. I'm really thankful for it.
And I was going to ask, but I think you answered it, is like, with guys like Watt and Hodges, like, they have their own, like, you know, entire careers, but like the last, like, especially with Watt, like, for a while I can count every year, I can catch Watt at one point at the grog shop with the Missing Men or the Second Men, and like now I've only been seeing him with you at the MSSV. So I think you guys have no, it's awesome, dude. It's like, and I mean it in the best way. Like, it's really cool to, like, for everyone, like, in MSSV, very established careers, to, like, find, like, a band, like a home base in a sense, like, after doing all these amazing things. I think it also shows that like, that growth, that personality, that like we kind of talked about trying to find through recording yourself. And I think that's so cool that can happen.
Yeah. I mean, I hope I get to see the Missing Men tour again. Also, I love that band. Tom Watson, man, he's like incredible guitarist. He's had an old band called Slovenly, I think. Man, what a great band that was. Yeah, Tom's one of my favorite guitar players. But yeah, I mean, you know, I mean, MSSV, I don't think it's like a culmination of anything for anybody. It just happens to be what's going on right now. And I'm, you know, like, those guys all still have like tons of stuff happening on their own, rightfully so. And thankfully, because we all get to hear all sorts of things that Hodges and Watt are involved in. And that's a gift in itself. But, I mean, I am really, like, thankful that they are into working on this music with me, for sure.
It's so cool. It's so cool. Mike, thank you so much for speaking with me at lengths this morning. I really appreciate it.
Oh man, anytime, Dave. Thanks for having me on.
And I'm looking forward to October 7th. My band's gonna be opening for you guys.
I know, that's great.
I'm so stoked.
Back at Beachland.
Yeah.
Yo, Spike Spiegel here. You just listened to Zig of the Gig podcast. Keep riding the bebop. See you, Space Cowboy. Bang.